So when we start talking about MMIW, we recognize first those amazing advocates in Canada who started this movement, those amazing Indigenous women and survivors and family members who finally stood up and said, we are not going to be silent about the rates in which we're going missing and murdered, and somebody has to do something about this. So I always want to kind of pay homage to them, those original founders of this movement. And from there, it kind of grew and was able to come down here into the States about 6 or 8 years ago. And it's the same movement here in the States and across the world. It's really a global epidemic, right? And we recognize those root causes of colonization and that this has been going on for 500 years. I think when we talk about the rates now in which we're going missing and murdered, we'll never really truly know that number because you would have to track all the way back to when Columbus first landed here. And that's just for Turtle Island. That doesn't include, all of our other Indigenous relatives across the globe that were affected by settler colonialism. And I really think anywhere there is settler colonialism, you're going to have Indigenous women and girls go missing and murdered.
Miigwech, Kristin. Yes, I agree. So as a educator, as a historian, that's where I believe it starts with is in the history, right? The written history. And we know that the people that write history are conquerors. When I teach about, even my children, I have 4 young boys, when I teach them, it's an undoing of what's already been done in this country. And, a lot of people are upset that we're still talking about things like Columbus and why that is relevant and how that ties into MMIW. But it starts with that act, right? That violation to the land, to its original inhabitants. And it just kept going. That was just the start in this country, as you said. And so for me, that's when the erasure of, that's at best, right? Really seen as less than human is what took place. And so educating about the truth of what happened in our country and this country. And if you go to other countries, they know the truth. But you're absolutely right, Kristin. They don't want to share that truth. They don't want to acknowledge that. And until we do that, just like any offense that happens to someone, that's where you must start, is with the truth, reconciliation for it to move forward. And so that's where I start at the very beginning. And that was very intentional, and it was designed, and it came from Europe. And it was all about capitalism and land. And, there was a reason they were fleeing Europe. And so that's where I like to start when I partner and ally with people, because it does go way back and it's still tied. And so as a scholar, I look specifically at the story of Indigenous women. And so great cities like Chicago and Milwaukee and Racine, all along the Great Lakes, were all founded by Potawatomi women or Indigenous women. And so because we were erasing their stories, they're not a part of that history, right? And so that's, for me, that's where I start. But most definitely our relationship with the land, when we made a conscious choice to divide ourselves or separate ourselves from the land and see it as a commodity, this is where it started, right? And so what we do to the land happens to our families, happens to our women, is women are the first life givers. They are the very first teachers. I don't care who you are. A woman was your very first teacher. And so Indigenous people know this. And so that's why you're seeing people like Kristin and other people that are fighting for our environment, our natural world, at the forefront. Indigenous people are at the forefront of that because they carry that knowledge with them and they know it's all connected.
Yeah, I think it's like a dehumanizing process that happened, right? It's very patriarchal, like women are possessions. That's the foundation of it. Like, we are not human beings. We cannot think for ourselves. We're these irrational creatures. Like, that's written all over the, colonial settler colonial history. For Indigenous worldviews, women, like you said, are life givers, and we're leadership within communities, and we had economic power within and decision making, power within our communities. So I think they knew that they had to really attack Indigenous women if they wanted these communities to sort of be breakable. But you're hearing baby Wolverine in the back. But what we've been able to prove is that Indigenous women and young girls are extremely resilient, and that spirit can't be broken, that connection can't be broken. So I think it depends upon how deep you want to go. Like, what are the root causes? What are the intersecting issues? I think acknowledging the truth, Starla, like you said, is a must. Like, we have to face that sort of ugly truth, and they have to accept that. Like, we haven't really seen that. Like, we're starting to see a little bit more of the truth come out, and wonderful allies like Marianne, who understand it and who get it and want to help and use whatever power and doors they can to open up for us. But there's still a lot that aren't acknowledging, like those people in positions of power. I think they're well aware of the history of MMIW and the issues and that it's happening. They're just choosing not to do anything about it. There's enough education out there, I think, at this point and they've documented it in their own history. I'm like, well, you knew what you were doing. The whole BIA was created for what purpose? Was to eliminate Indigenous people, So they've documented their own genocide, their acts of genocide, as far as I'm concerned. But we need more than apologies. We need a little bit more than land acknowledgments. We need some action. We need you to take accountability, repair the harms, and then make sure they don't happen again. And I think that's the heart of MMIW and working with allies like Marianne. She's doing the work, and then some.
The only thing that I would add is I find interesting is we start here at, I call it the United States and Kristin calls it Turtle Island, and they came here after doing the same thing to indigenous populations in Europe and conquering them, and then it just flowed across the ocean and keeps moving forward. And I think the lack of acknowledgement is a grand denial that is, it's kind of like a cancer. The more that people deny that this happened, and then it just keeps replicating itself. And there's also a lot of, and I don't like to use the word victim, but I will in this case because it's victim blaming. There's a lot of blaming of the survivors of the violence for the violence. That happens in sexual assaults between different walks of life, but I really see it also in MMIW is looking at Indigenous people and saying we did them a favor from kind of the white standpoint of us bringing, not us, because my people were still on an island in the North Atlantic, but bringing civilization when there was already this wonderful civilization and a worldview which probably, had it been adopted by the world, I don't think that our planet would be endangered as it is now. I think it would be in really good shape if it had been handed over to people who knew how to use it respectively and responsibly.